My wife was cheating on me the whole time we were married, and I found out years later. When I found my ex-wife's diary hidden in our old storage unit 3 years after our divorce, I thought it would just be another box of memories to throw away. Instead, I discovered that our entire 15-year marriage had been a lie, and the woman I thought I knew had been living a double life that would make a soap opera writer blush. But here's the kicker. Finding out the truth actually saved my life in ways I never could have imagined. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story is about to get absolutely wild. My name's David, I'm 45 now, and I thought I had lived through the worst heartbreak of my life when my wife Emma left me 3 years ago. We've been married for 15 years, together for 18 total, and when she announced she wanted a divorce, I was completely blindsided. Emma was my college sweetheart. We met during our sophomore year at Ohio State. She was studying psychology, I was in business school. She was this vibrant, outgoing woman who could light up any room she walked into. Everyone loved Emma. Hell, I was convinced I was the luckiest guy in the world when she agreed to marry me. Our marriage seemed perfect from the outside. We had a beautiful house in the suburbs of Columbus, successful careers. I worked in corporate finance. She became a family therapist, and what I believed was a solid, loving relationship. We traveled together, hosted dinner parties, went to couples game nights with friends. Emma was always the life of the party, always had everyone laughing, always seemed genuinely happy. Sure, we had our rough patches like any couple, but nothing that seemed insurmountable. Emma could be moody sometimes, and there were periods where she seemed distant or preoccupied, but she worked with troubled families all day. I figured the stress of her job was getting to her. The divorce came out of nowhere. One Tuesday evening in March, I came home from work expecting our usual routine, dinner, maybe, some Netflix, the comfortable mundanity of a long marriage. Instead, Emma was sitting at our kitchen table with a stack of papers in front of her. She looked up at me with these cold, distant eyes I'd never seen before and said she wanted a divorce. No explanation, no we need to talk, no tears. Just a flat, emotionless statement that she was done with our marriage. When I asked why, what had gone wrong if there was someone else, she just shook her head and said she'd fallen out of love with me years ago and couldn't pretend anymore. She said she needed to find herself, that she felt trapped in our suburban life, that she deserved to be happy. I begged her to try counseling, to work things out, to at least explain what had changed. Emma refused everything. She said her mind was made up, that dragging it out would only make things worse for both of us. She'd already found an apartment, already consulted with a divorce attorney, already divided up our assets in her head. The whole conversation lasted maybe 20 minutes. 15 years of marriage, reduced to a 20-minute business transaction. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Emma moved to Portland, claiming she needed a fresh start, somewhere completely different. She took half of everything, which was fair, and I kept the house, because she said she didn't want it anymore. For 3 years, I thought I knew why my marriage ended. I blamed myself for being boring, for getting comfortable, for not being the exciting boyfriend she'd fallen in love with in college. I figured we'd grown apart like millions of couples do, that Emma had simply outgrown me and our life together. I went through the typical divorce guy phase, too much drinking, random dates that went nowhere, a general sense that I'd failed at the most important thing in my life. My friends tried to be supportive, but what could they say? Emma had seemed happy right up until she wasn't, and then she was gone. I eventually started therapy, which helped me work through the depression and self-blame. I began dating again, slowly, and even had a few relationships that lasted several months. Nothing serious, but I was starting to believe I might find love again someday. Then came the storage unit. Emma and I had rented a storage unit during our marriage to hold seasonal decorations, old furniture, and boxes of mementos we couldn't bear to throw away but didn't have room for in the house. After the divorce, we'd agreed that I would clean it out eventually and split anything valuable. Honestly, I've been putting it off for 3 years because I wasn't ready to face all those memories. But my lease was up, and I needed to either renew or empty the unit. I figured enough time had passed that I could handle going through our old stuff without falling apart. Most of it was exactly what I expected: Christmas decorations, photo albums from our early years. Together, Emma's old textbooks from grad school. I was actually feeling pretty good about the whole process, thinking I'd finally achieved some closure. That's when I found the box labeled Personal EJ in Emma's handwriting. I almost didn't open it. Emma's middle name was Jane, So EJ was how she signed personal things. Sometimes, I figured it was just more of her old college papers or maybe some childhood keepsakes she'd forgotten about. But something made me curious. The box was taped shut really well, like Emma had sealed it carefully, and hadn't planned on opening it again. It was also hidden behind a bunch of other boxes, not something you'd stumble across accidentally. Inside were 3 leather-bound journals, the expensive kind with thick pages and ribbon bookmarks. The kind Emma used to write in every night before bed, though she'd always been secretive about what she wrote. When I'd ask, she'd just say she was processing her thoughts from work or planning for the next day. I opened the first journal, dated from our 3rd year of marriage. What I read in the first entry made my blood run cold. Emma had been having an affair with her supervisor at the therapy clinic where she worked. Not just a physical affair, an emotional, all-consuming relationship that had been going on for 8 months by the time she wrote that entry. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how she wrote about me. She called me David the Dull, described our marriage as suffocating, and wrote about how she fantasized about leaving me almost every day. She detailed elaborate lies she'd told me about working late or going out with girlfriends when she was actually meeting her supervisor at hotels or his apartment. She wrote about how easy it was to deceive me, how I never questioned her stories or seemed to notice when she came home smelling like another man's cologne. She called me pathetically trusting and, too, boring to even suspect anything. I sat in that storage unit and read for 4 hours straight. Journal after journal, year after year, affair after affair. Because there wasn't just one affair. There were at least 6 different men over the course of our marriage, and those were just the ones she wrote about in detail. There was Marcus, her supervisor, who lasted 2 years. Then Derek, a married client's husband she met at an office party, who she saw on and off for 18 months. Then Kevin, a guy she met at the gym, who she wrote about with an intensity that made it clear she thought she was in love with him. Each affair was chronicled in excruciating detail, where they met, what they did, how she felt, and most painfully, how she felt about me in comparison. But here's what really destroyed me. It wasn't just that Emma had been cheating on me for most of our marriage. It was how much she seemed to enjoy deceiving me. She wrote about the thrill of lying to my face, about how she'd come home from being with another man and kiss me goodnight like nothing had happened. She described elaborate schemes to cover her tracks, like having her affairs during the day while I was at work or claiming she was going to weekend therapy, conferences that didn't exist. In one entry, she wrote about how she'd had sex with Kevin in our bed while I was on a business trip and how she'd changed the sheets and sprayed air freshener so I'd never know. Then she wrote about how I'd told her I missed her when I called that night and how she'd had to bite her lip to keep from laughing. She documented my birthday dinners, our anniversary celebrations, family holidays, all while she was actively involved with other men and counting down the days until she could leave me. The final journal entries were the most devastating. Emma had been planning to leave me for over 2 years before she actually did. She'd been methodically preparing for the divorce, copying financial documents, consulting with lawyers, even looking at apartments in Portland, all while pretending everything was fine. She wrote about how she'd stop having sex with me because it felt like cheating on Kevin, which would be laughable if it wasn't so twisted. She convinced me that her decreased interest in intimacy was due to stress from work, and I'd been understanding and patient about it. The last entry was dated just a week before she asked for the divorce. She wrote about how excited she was to finally be free, how she couldn't wait to start a real relationship with Kevin without having to sneak around, and how she hoped I'd find someone who actually deserves him someday. She actually felt sorry for me. After 15 years of systematic deception and betrayal, Emma pitted me for being such a trusting husband. I drove home in a daze and spent the next 3 days processing what I'd learned. Everything I thought I knew about my marriage was a lie. Every memory I cherished was tainted by the knowledge that Emma had been performing the role of loving wife while living an entirely different life. Behind my back, the business trips where she'd seemed so sad to see me go, she was excited to have the house to herself with Kevin. The time she'd seemed distracted or moody, she was probably fighting with one of her affair partners or stressed about keeping her story straight. Our anniversary dinner at that expensive restaurant downtown, she'd written about how bored she was, how she kept thinking about Derek and wishing she was with him instead. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Instead of falling apart completely, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. For 3 years, I'd been torturing myself with questions about what I'd done wrong, how I'd failed as a husband, why I hadn't been enough for Emma. I'd been carrying this crushing guilt, convinced that if I'd just been more attentive, more exciting, more something, my marriage might have survived. Reading those journals was horrible, but it also freed me from that guilt. Emma hadn't left because I was inadequate. She'd left because she was fundamentally dishonest and had never been the person I thought she was. The woman I'd mourned for 3 years had never actually existed. The Emma I'd fallen in love with, married, and grieved losing was a character she'd played, not who she really was. I made copies of everything before I threw the journals away, not because I wanted to hurt Emma or use them against her somehow, but because I needed proof that I wasn't going crazy. The level of deception was so extensive, so carefully orchestrated, that part of me couldn't believe it was real. I also wanted evidence in case Emma ever tried to rewrite history or contact me again. The journals painted a clear picture of exactly who she was and what our marriage had really been. Then I did something that surprised even me. I started laughing. Sitting in my living room, surrounded by photocopies of my ex-wife's confessions, I laughed until I cried. Not because anything was funny, but because the whole situation was so absurd it was almost unbelievable. I'd been married to a sociopath for 15 years and never knew it. Emma had exhibited every sign of narcissistic personality disorder: the need for constant admiration from multiple affair partners, the complete lack of empathy, enjoying my pain and confusion, the grandiose sense of self-importance, believing she deserved better than me, and the willingness to exploit others without remorse. She'd constructed an elaborate false persona to trap me in a marriage that served her needs while she pursued what she really wanted on the side. I wasn't a husband to her. I was a cover story, a financial safety net, and apparently a source of entertainment. The therapy training had probably helped her become a better manipulator. She knew exactly how to present herself as the victim when she left, making me believe I was the problem in our marriage. I called my therapist and scheduled an emergency session. Dr. Martinez had been helping me work through my post-divorce depression for 2 years, and she'd heard me blame myself for my marriage's failure countless times. When I told her what I discovered, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that changed my perspective completely. Finding out the truth, as painful as it was, might be the best thing that could have happened to me. She explained that I'd been suffering from a form of psychological abuse called gaslighting, where Emma had manipulated my perception of reality to make me doubt my own instincts and memories. Even after the divorce, I'd been carrying the psychological damage from years of systematic deception. Learning the truth was traumatic, but it was also the beginning of real healing. For the first time in years, I could trust my own judgment again. The most shocking revelation came when I started connecting dots. Things that had seemed like random coincidences or Emma's quirks suddenly made perfect sense in the context of her affairs. That time she'd insisted we go to a different restaurant for our anniversary because our usual place was too crowded. I found an entry where she wrote about seeing Marcus there with his wife and needing to avoid them. The weekend she'd claimed to be at a therapy conference in Chicago, but came back with a tan. She'd actually been in Florida with Kevin. The new lingerie she'd bought that she said was for me, but never wore around me. It was for Derek, according to a detailed entry about a hotel encounter. Even her career choice started to make sense. Emma hadn't become a therapist to help people. She'd been drawn to a profession that would help her understand and manipulate human psychology more effectively. I realized I needed to warn Kevin. This was the hardest decision I had to make after reading the journals. Emma had left me to be with Kevin, but based on her past patterns, she was probably already looking for someone new or had started another affair. Kevin had no idea what he was getting into. Emma was a master manipulator who would use him until she got bored or found someone better, then discard him just like she discarded me. I struggled with whether to reach out to him. It wasn't my responsibility to save Emma's next victim, and I had no way to contact him without looking like a crazy ex-husband. But then I remembered how I'd felt for 3 years, blaming myself for the failure of my marriage, and I couldn't let another man go through that if I could prevent it. I hired a private investigator to find Kevin's contact information. This sounds extreme, but I needed to know if Emma was still with him and whether she was already repeating her patterns. The PI found Kevin's address and phone number, but also discovered something interesting. Emma had moved out of Kevin's apartment 6 months earlier. According to public records and social media, Kevin's Facebook wasn't private. Emma had moved in with Kevin immediately after our divorce was finalized. But by last fall, she was living alone again in a different part of Portland. The PI also found evidence that Emma was active on multiple dating apps under slightly different names, which suggested she was either single again or cheating on whoever she was with now. I decided to send Kevin a letter instead of calling him. I figured he deserved to know the truth about Emma, but I didn't want to ambush him with a phone call or seem like I was stalking him. The letter I sent was simple and direct. I explained who I was, that I discovered evidence of Emma's affairs during our marriage, and that I thought he should know what kind of person he was dealing with. I offered to share the evidence if he was interested, but made it clear I wasn't looking for revenge or trying to cause problems. I just wanted to give him information that might protect him. I included my email address and told him he could contact me if he wanted to know more or ignore the letter completely if he thought I was just a bitter ex-husband making things up. Kevin emailed me 3 days later. He thanked me for the letter and said he'd like to see the evidence I mentioned. He also said some things about his relationship with Emma had never made sense to him, and he was starting to suspect she hadn't been honest about the timeline of our divorce. When I sent Kevin copies of the relevant journal entries, everything clicked into place for him. Emma had been cheating on me with Kevin for over a year before she left me, but she told Kevin that we were already separated and just waiting for the paperwork to go through. She'd painted me as an ex who was dragging out the divorce process out of spite. Kevin had believed Emma's story because he wanted to, but he'd always felt guilty about the relationship, starting so quickly after what he thought was the end of my marriage. Now he understood that he'd been unknowingly participating in an affair. He also confirmed my suspicions about Emma's pattern. She cheated on him too, with a coworker at her new job in Portland. When Kevin confronted her about it, Emma had denied everything and turned it around on him, accusing him of being paranoid and controlling. Sound familiar? Kevin had moved to Portland to be with Emma, leaving behind his job and friends in Ohio. When their relationship imploded, he found himself alone in a city where he knew no one, trying to rebuild his life from scratch. Kevin and I started corresponding regularly. This might sound weird, two men who'd been involved with the same woman becoming friends, but we had a unique understanding of what each other had been through. Kevin had experienced 6 months of Emma's manipulation and gaslighting. I'd endured 15 years of it. We shared stories about Emma's lies, her manipulation tactics, and the ways she'd made us both doubt our own perceptions of reality. It was therapeutic for both of us to have someone who truly understood what Emma was capable of. Kevin told me about incidents that sounded exactly like things Emma had done to me, the way she'd twist conversations to make him feel like he was overreacting, how she'd lie about small things for no apparent reason, how she'd play victim whenever she was confronted about her behavior. He also confirmed something I'd suspected. Emma was already in a new relationship. She'd moved in with her coworker, the one she'd cheated with just 2 weeks after Kevin moved out. The most validating conversation came when Kevin asked me about Emma's family. Emma had always claimed to have a difficult relationship with her parents, saying they were judgmental and controlling. She'd convinced me that she needed distance from them for her mental health, which is why we rarely visited and why they seemed cool toward me when we did see them. But Kevin said Emma had told him completely different stories about her family. According to Emma's version for Kevin, her parents loved her but had never approved of me. She claimed I was jealous of her close relationship with them and had gradually isolated her from her family over the years. When Kevin asked if I'd ever met Emma's parents, I realized we'd probably both been lied to about everything. I'd met them maybe a dozen times in 15 years, and they'd always seemed polite, but distant. I'd assumed it was because they thought I wasn't good enough for Emma. Now I wondered if Emma had been telling them lies about me too, painting me as the villain to justify her behavior or make herself seem like the victim of an unhappy marriage. I decided to reach out to Emma's parents. This was a huge step for me because I've been convinced for years that they disliked me. But I needed to know if Emma had been lying to all of us, playing us against each other to cover her tracks. I called Emma's mother, Sandra, and asked if we could talk. I explained that I discovered some things about Emma's behavior during our marriage that made me question everything I thought I knew. Sandra was quiet for a long moment, then asked if I could come visit in person. She said there were Things about Emma she'd wanted to discuss with me for years, but hadn't known how to bring up. The conversation I had with Emma's parents was eye-opening in ways I never expected. Emma had been lying to everyone. Sandra and her husband Robert told me they'd been worried about Emma's behavior since college. They noticed patterns of dishonesty, manipulation, and what they called a complete lack of empathy. For other people, Emma had been caught in major lies throughout her teenage years, stealing money from Sandra's purse, and blaming it on Robert, telling her high school boyfriend that Robert had been inappropriate with her when he tried to set boundaries about her behavior, falsely accusing a teacher of harassment when she was caught cheating on an exam. They'd hoped marriage would stabilize her, that having real responsibilities and a committed relationship would help her mature. When Emma seemed happy with me, they thought maybe she'd finally grown out of her destructive patterns. But Emma had been playing them against me the entire time. She'd told them I was controlling and paranoid, that I monitored her activities and didn't trust her to make her own decisions. She claimed I was trying to isolate her from her family and had asked them not to contact me directly because it caused problems in our marriage. Sandra said she'd wanted to reach out to me many times over the years, especially when Emma's stories about our relationship didn't add up. But Emma had convinced them that any contact with me would make things worse for her. They'd also suspected Emma was having affairs. Robert had seen her at restaurants with men who weren't me, and Sandra had noticed that Emma seemed to have a lot of male friends from work that she talked about constantly. When Emma left me, they weren't surprised. They were relieved that I might finally be free from what they knew was a toxic relationship, but they felt terrible that they hadn't found a way to warn me. The most shocking revelation was that Emma had been stealing from me for years. Sandra mentioned that Emma always seemed to have more money than her salary should have allowed. Emma had expensive clothes, jewelry, and took trips that seemed beyond her budget, even with my income supplementing hers. This made me think about our finances during the marriage. Emma had handled most of our day-to-day expenses while I focused on investments and major purchases. I trusted her completely and never questioned her spending. When I went back through her old bank statements and credit card records, I found evidence of what Sandra was talking about. Emma had been systematically skimming money from our joint accounts. Never huge amounts that would trigger my attention, but enough to fund her affairs and maintain her secret lifestyle. She'd also been using our credit cards for expenses related to her affairs. Hotel rooms, dinners, gifts. But she'd been smart about disguising them as legitimate expenses or mixing them in with real purchases, so they wouldn't stand out. Over 15 years, Emma had probably stolen close to $40,000 from me. I contacted a forensic accountant to get an exact total. This might seem like overkill for a marriage that was already over, but I needed to know the full extent of Emma's deception. Plus, if she was continuing these patterns with new victims, someone needed to document her behavior. The forensic accountant found evidence of systematic financial fraud throughout our marriage. Emma had been not just skimming from her joint accounts, but also opening credit cards in my name, taking cash advances, and even forging my signature on financial documents. The total came to just over $60,000, money that Emma had stolen to fund her affairs and secret lifestyle. I also discovered that Emma had lied about her student loan debt when we got married. She claimed to have $30,000 in loans, but the actual amount was closer to $80,000. I've been helping pay down what I thought were her loans for years, but she'd been pocketing most of the money and making minimum payments on the actual debt. The evidence was overwhelming, but I didn't want revenge. As satisfying as it might have been to expose Emma publicly or pursue legal action against her, I realized that would just give her more power over my life. She'd already stolen 15 years from me. I wasn't going to let her steal anymore. Instead, I focused on making sure she couldn't hurt anyone else the way she'd hurt me and Kevin. I compiled all the evidence, the journal entries, financial records, timeline of lies, into a comprehensive document. I shared copies with Kevin, Emma's parents, and my attorney, with instructions that it should only be used if Emma tried to harm someone else or if legal action became necessary. I also made sure Kevin had enough information to warn future victims if he became aware of Emma targeting someone new. The healing process took almost a year. Learning the truth about Emma and our marriage was traumatic in ways I hadn't expected. Even though I was relieved to finally understand what had really happened, I had to grieve the loss of 15 years of my life and confront the fact that I'd been married to someone who was essentially a stranger. Dr. Martinez helped me work through the complex emotions: anger, betrayal, relief, confusion, and, surprisingly, gratitude. I was angry about the lies and theft, felt betrayed by the systematic deception, but also grateful that I'd finally learned the truth and could move forward with my life. The hardest part was learning to trust my own judgment again. Emma had been so good at manipulating my perceptions that I questioned everything: my memories, my instincts, my ability to read people and situations accurately. But slowly, with therapy and the support of real friends, I started to rebuild my confidence and sense of self. I started dating again, but with much better boundaries. The experience with Emma taught me to pay attention to red flags I'd ignored before. I learned to trust my instincts when something didn't feel right, to ask questions when stories didn't add up, and to take relationships slowly instead of diving in headfirst. I also learned the importance of maintaining my own identity and interests in a relationship, instead of revolving my entire life around my partner the way I had with Emma. My first serious relationship after Emma was with a woman named Rachel, who I met through a hiking group. Rachel was honest, straightforward, and refreshingly transparent about her feelings and intentions. We dated for 8 months before deciding we were better as friends, but it was a healthy relationship that helped me remember what normal dating felt like. 2 years after finding the journals, I met Amy. Amy is everything Emma pretended to be: genuinely kind, emotionally available, and incapable of the kind of systematic deception that Emma thrived on. She's a nurse, has a close relationship with her family, and treats other people with actual respect and empathy. We've been together for 6 months now, and the difference between this relationship and my marriage to Emma is like night and day. Amy and I communicate openly about everything. We share financial responsibilities transparently, and I never feel like I'm walking on eggshells or trying to decode hidden meanings in her words. She knows about Emma and what happened in my marriage. I was honest with Amy about my past from early in our relationship, because I refused to build another relationship on secrets or lies. Amy was shocked by Emma's behavior, but grateful that I'd shared the truth with her. Kevin and I still keep in touch. He moved back to Ohio last year and is doing well. He's in therapy, working through his own trust issues from the experience with Emma and slowly getting back into dating. We meet for coffee every few months and joke that we should start a support group for Emma's victims. Kevin heard through mutual friends in Portland that Emma's relationship with her co-worker didn't last either. Apparently, she cheated on him too, then moved on to someone else when the relationship imploded. Kevin said he felt sorry for the guy, but wasn't surprised. Emma's parents and I have maintained relationship too. Sandra sends me Christmas cards and updates about their lives, and I think they feel relieved to finally have someone who understands what Emma is really like. The storage unit incident happened almost 3 years ago now. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never found those journals. Would I have spent the rest of my life blaming myself for the failure of my marriage? Would I have carried that guilt and self-doubt into every future relationship? Finding out the truth was painful, but it was also liberating. I know now that Emma's behavior wasn't my fault, that there was nothing I could have done differently to save our marriage, and that the woman I mourned for 3 years was never real to begin with. I also know that I'm not a bad judge of character. Emma was just an exceptionally skilled manipulator who fooled everyone, not just me. The most unexpected outcome of this whole experience is that I'm actually grateful. Not grateful for the 15 years of deception and abuse, but grateful that I discovered the truth while I was still young enough to build a real life with someone honest. If Emma had continued her charade for another decade, or if I'd never found those journals, I might have wasted my entire life on a lie. I'm grateful for the relationship with Amy, which is built on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect that I never had with Emma. I'm grateful for the friendship with Kevin, who understands what I went through in a way no one else can. I'm grateful for the relationship with Emma's parents, who turn out to be wonderful people who were just as deceived as I was. Most of all, I'm grateful that I finally trust myself again. Emma spent 15 years convincing me that my perceptions were wrong, my instincts were off, and my judgment was flawed. Learning the truth proved that I've been right about many things I've been talked out of believing. Emma still has no idea that I know. She's never contacted me since the divorce, and I've never reached out to her. As far as I know, she's still living in Portland, still cycling through relationships, still leaving a trail of confused and damaged men behind her. Part of me wants to confront her, to let her know that her carefully constructed lies have been exposed. But I've realized that would give her exactly what she wants: drama, attention, and the opportunity to play victim again. The best revenge against someone like Emma is living well without them. She spent 15 years trying to convince me I was boring, inadequate, and lucky to have her. Now I know the truth. She was lucky to have me, and she threw it away because she's incapable of appreciating anything real. My advice to anyone who thinks their partner might be cheating: trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't let anyone convince you that you're being paranoid or oversensitive when you're just paying attention to obvious red flags. But also understand that discovering infidelity might reveal problems much deeper than just cheating. In my case, the affairs were just symptoms of Emma's fundamental dishonesty and lack of empathy. The cheating wasn't the real problem. The real problem was that I was married to someone who was essentially a sociopath. The ending to this story isn't about revenge or justice. Emma will probably never face real consequences for what she did to me, Kevin, and whoever comes after us. People like her rarely do, because they're so good at manipulating situations to their advantage. But the real ending is that I'm finally free. Free from the lies, free from the guilt, free from the nagging, feeling that I failed at the most important relationship of my life. I know now that my marriage didn't fail because I wasn't good enough. It failed because it was built on deception from the very beginning. Amy and I are talking about moving in together. This feels like a huge step for me, because the last time I shared a home with someone, she was systematically betraying me every day for 15 years. But Amy has earned my trust through consistent honesty, transparency, and genuine care for my well-being. We've talked about my past, about my fears and triggers, about what I need to feel secure in a relationship. Amy is patient with my occasional paranoia and understanding when I need reassurance. She doesn't make me feel crazy for wanting transparency. She welcomes it. The difference between loving someone who's honest and loving someone who's a pathological liar is the difference between building on solid ground and building on quicksand. With Emma, I was always off balance, always second-guessing myself, always feeling like I was missing something important. With Amy, I feel grounded, secure, and genuinely understood for the first time in my adult life. So that's my story. It started with what I thought was a simple divorce from a wife who'd fallen out of love with me, and ended with the discovery that my entire marriage had been an elaborate con game orchestrated by a master manipulator. But it also led me to real love, genuine friendships, and most importantly, trust in my own judgment. Again, sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Emma leaving me felt like the end of the world at the time, but it was actually the beginning of my real life. The life where I'm valued for who I actually am, not used as a cover story for someone else's secrets. The life where I can trust my partner completely because she's worthy of that trust. The life where I never have to wonder what my wife is really doing when she says she's working late. Finding those journals 3 years after my divorce was devastating, but it was also the moment I finally got my life back. And that's worth celebrating, even if the celebration came with a side of emotional trauma and a crash course in narcissistic personality disorder. The truth really can set you free. It just might hurt like hell first.